once again as we go through a week with plenty of upsets, a lot to talk about here on the show. And we're at the point in the season. We, in fact, just had a coach get fired yesterday, Kyle Keller at Stephen F. Austin. But we're starting to look at the hot seat. We're starting to evaluate which coaches are under the most pressure to perform, which teams have to turn things around in order to save their coach, or sometimes, and I think this doesn't get talked about enough, there can be coaches under pressure who aren't necessarily going to be fired this offseason. But there is no doubt that in some cases there are coaches who, how they perform the rest of this season, how their team rebounds from whatever is going on, whether it's a string of recent losses, some turmoil there within the program, they've got to respond to it in order to set themselves up next season. Because it is very, very easy to walk into a season and only have a very slim, narrow road that you can go down and actually survive things when you're a head coach, particularly in this NIL era. I bring Mike Woodson, who comes to mind at Indiana, who, yes, he came back this year. But if he didn't have great success, if they weren't a top 25 type team, a team that was competing for second and third weekend NCAA tournament success, Indiana knew it was going to start looking in other directions. So we're going to talk about hot seat coaches, coaches who are under the most pressure at this point in the season here in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we're going to talk about the teams that are under the most pressure to perform. And of course, the coaches fit into that. But a combination of some of the coaches who won't be necessarily set to be fired, or maybe it's less so what they've done as a coach, their recent track record of success, and more so what the program is going through at this given moment. So we'll explain that further as we go through the show, but coaches under the most pressure here in the first segment, and then the teams in the second segment. Of course, in the third segment, as always, we will get you out of here with the games of the week. But I mentioned him right there off the top. The coach who I think has the hottest seat in America right now is Mike Woodson at Indiana. And it has been up and down and up and down over and over again for the Hoosiers, not just this year, through his tenure with the team. It came in and made sense, I guess. A respected assistant coach, had NBA experience. We've seen that be successful in certain situations. We've seen it fail in other situations. But Mike Woodson comes in to coach this team, and I think really last year, for most of the season, people had kind of accepted, from my outside understanding of that fan base, that it was probably time to move on. And what made it so easy for the fan base to make that decision, to stick by their gut feeling that it was time for change, was the presence of Dusty May. Dusty May, everyone knew last year at FAU that it was his last season coaching there, that he was going to take one of the big jobs and he was going to start building success there. Well, he has plenty of ties to Indiana. He has been a part of that school before, and it felt like if Indiana came calling, they would be the front runner to land his services. Given their pedigree, given his history with the program, it seemed like a really good fit there if they chose to go that direction. Well, they don't go that direction. They decide to retain Mike Woodson. They give him one more opportunity. They invest heavily in NIL. They go out in the transfer portal. They land some big-time players across the roster. They land Kanan Carlisle. They land Umar Ballo, Miles Rice. They go get Luke Goody from a rival team in the Big Ten just to round out that starting lineup. Of course, bringing in Bryson Tucker, a five-star recruit, to go with Mackenzie Mbako, Malik Renault, Trey Galloway. It looked like one of the deepest and best, most talented rosters in America when we entered the season. A top 25 preseason roster for sure. Could have been probably up in the probably the mid-teens at least. But it all came down to, can Mike Woodson put the pieces together? On some nights, it has looked like possibly he can. On other nights, it has looked like he has no idea how to play these guys together. Of course, Carlisle has not lived up to sort of the preseason expectation. That has hurt. But Balo just does not seem to be a good culture fit there. A lot of frustration build about kind of the style of play, the commitment on both ends of the floor at various times. And so there's this growing tension within the fan base. You get over the past few games, you've started to hear boos in the crowd, you've started to hear Fire Woodson chants. It's starting to get ugly at Indiana. But then they rattle off a win, and you look and you're like, well, they're right there. They're kind of on the bubble. I don't think they're going to get to the right side of the bubble just because there's too much going on. It's hard when your fan base is not cheering against you, but booing you every time you do something bad. It's hard when a coach kind of knows he's on the way out, when the players know the coach is probably on his way out, to sort of rally together and make an NCAA tournament run. That just doesn't happen that often. So I think the writing is pretty much on the wall, but obviously there's an opportunity there. This is still a talented roster. There is still this open window. And I talked about this on social media. And so I think it's important to talk about here as we discuss Mike Woodson on the hot seat. While I do not agree with the decision necessarily to bring him back versus going and getting what was about as proven of a coaching prospect as Dusty May, there is this idea out there. And in the NIL era, I think you're going to see it become more prevalent that when a coach is close to being fired, but there's still a belief that he could be the guy within the program, within the board of directors, whoever is making the basketball decisions. The athletic director, of course, is a big part of that. When they sit down and they are determining, should we move on, there's now a math equation that they have to solve. You can pay the buyout of your current coach, potentially the buyout of the incoming coach, then pay your coach, your new coach, what is a competitive salary, which is going to be upwards of $5 million, at least if you're trying to be a top end Big Ten program. And then you've got to also work NIL into that equation. So by pushing off the firing, of course, the buyout drops significantly by almost $5 million. Of course, you have to pay him for his services through the course of that year. So that pretty much offsets that drop in that buyout. So now we're talking about, okay, well, we don't have to pay the buyout of the other coach. We don't have to pay that other coach's salary, which would be higher. So we save ourselves a little bit there. We save ourselves probably a big chunk on the buyout. And now we can take that difference and invest it into the NIL. Right? Because we're going to have to push NIL into the center of the table here, regardless. So if we don't make the coaching change, say it's an extra $5 million. Well, that's going to get you some really, really good top end players in college basketball. So if there is this lingering doubt that you want to fire the coach who's currently in place, give him that extra year with the best roster that money can buy. And then if he can't do it with that roster, well, it's time to move on. I think that's in large part what's happening at Indiana, and we'll see how it pans out ultimately, because I think the Dusty May thing throws a wrench in that kind of math equation that you're trying to do there. But as we move on, as we talk about the other coaches facing the most pressure, I don't think there's really anyone in the country you can argue is under more pressure without being on the hot seat than John Calipari. Arkansas has not started off well. They finally on Wednesday night got their first SEC win against Georgia. They survive late. A really crazy sequence in what was a wild night of action on Wednesday. Adutiero is fouled after an offensive rebound. He makes the first free throw. He misses the second, but gets the offensive rebound and puts it back in. Arkansas wins by 3 and really kind of salvages, I think, their season. If they had lost that one, it pretty much would have been just over for them in terms of the bubble conversation. Like, what argument are you going to make? You have no wins in your conference. It's very hard to string together enough wins in the SEC at that point to get something going. So beating Georgia, a team that has started to gain some respect as an NCAA tournament caliber team, I think that was huge for the Razorbacks in being able to keep themselves on the bubble and continue to assert that there is hope for a bounce back. But there is going to have to be a bounce back because this group for John Calipari has just not gelled since he took over. He went out and, of course, did something different than he has done in the past. He brings in some transfers. It was not just a bunch of one and done prospects, but he had a couple. And you look at Boogie Fland, who was the highlight of that, the one that was the most likely to be a one and done prospect. Now he's out with injury. So I think it was huge for their confidence, just as a roster, as a group of players, to in his first game out get that win, prove to themselves that they can do this and they can still win games without what has been one of their best players to this point. Adutiero, of course, stepped up big in that effort. DJ Wagner is going to have to step up throughout the rest of the season in that point guard role. He was kind of playing alongside Fland a lot of times. Now it will be him on the ball. And confusion about John L. Davis just continues. He cannot figure things out at Arkansas. Really unsure what is going out there. I think the big swing for Arkansas at this point, what could kind of take them over the hump. And yes, as we talk about John Calipari here, we're going to talk a little bit more about like the positives of what they can achieve, because last episode we kind of went through the negatives. So if you want to talk through like what's gone wrong with John Calipari, last episode, go check it out because we went pretty far in depth with that. But he's under pressure. And so there also has to be a conversation about how can he turn that around? What can he do to fix this? And I think one of the big swing points for him and for this team would be getting Carter Knox in the mix. Struggled quite a bit early in the season to fit into college basketball, to kind of get up to speed coming from high school, has shown some flashes. And if they can get some consistency from him, I think it could take them up into that bubble conversation and potentially onto the right side of the bubble if they're able to pull off a few upsets throughout the next few weeks. Moving on, though, we've got another coach who is on the hot seat who has, again, been just one of the most up and down, inconsistent programs since he took over. Kyle Neptune at Villanova. Of course, taking over for Jay Wright was never going to be easy. You take a program which is pretty much synonymous with Jay Wright, at least in the national, focus. He built that into not necessarily a blue blood, but one of the best programs in college basketball. Just look across the NBA at the number of Villanova players who are in the league. Most of them on the Knicks, but plenty throughout the NBA. And it's interesting to see somebody who was kind of a hand-picked successor come in and at times look the part. He has recruited very well. He has used the transfer portal, I think, pretty well to land talent on the roster. I think they've kind of figured things out in terms of how to get talent in the door. I've liked pretty much every roster he has had at Villanova. But it's when you least expect it that they come and bite you. Villanova against other teams in Philadelphia has a horrendous record, despite clearly being the best program in that area. They drop games early in the season against teams that they have no business losing to. And so it leaves you kind of scratching your head and wondering, what is it about these small games that they cannot get up for? And it's cost them. It's cost them big time, because a lot of times those end up being quad 3, quad 4 losses by the end of the season. because these teams are playing in smaller conferences. They're not getting any of the recognition. They're falling down the board after they pick up that Villanova win. Meanwhile, Villanova is struggling to move up the board with that loss dragging them down. And so it has cost them as they try to get into the bubble conversation. It's hard when you've got these bad losses on the schedule. And then I get it. It's not hard. Excuse me. It's not easy to win in the Big East. But you're pretty much giving yourself zero margin when you come in with the non-conference resume that they have brought into league play multiple times under Kyle Neptune. And so I think if he misses the NCAA tournament, I think he's under serious pressure. Um, Again, like I said, there's no guarantee in this era that that means he will be fired. Like a few years ago, I would say pretty undoubtedly that if he did not make the NCAA tournament, we would be talking about a new coach at Villanova. But he was the handpicked successor, so you do want to give him that leash. You kind of feel like you owe it a lot of times to the outgoing Hall of Fame coach. But in addition to that, you've got the option to just throw NIL at him and let him try to figure it out, because I do think he has proven he can build the right roster. So can he go get that NIL resource, or will they give someone else a chance to start building things there at Villanova? Going to be something to watch. Or look, can he turn things around? Because they're still on the fringe of the bubble conversation. They've got a chance to make some noise in college basketball. Jerome Tang at Kansas State has been about as confusing of a storyline as we can talk about. Year one, Jerome Tang was incredible. Took Kansas State on a deep NCAA tournament run with a team that was a little bit thrown together. It had some interesting pieces on it. And you started to think, wow, this guy who was a longtime assistant at Baylor had tremendous success as an assistant coach, did well in recruiting. He is going to come in here, and this is going to be a great era for Kansas State basketball. And then last year, they had their struggles. Of course, Naquan Tomlin ends up off the team. And I think a lot of fans, it was very easy to blame the administration for disrupting the roster. You can kind of point the finger there. You lose your starting center and without much notice. And then he ends up, to further complicate things, playing at Memphis. So you then as a fan can really justify the anger that you have about the changes, because you're talking about kicking a guy off the team, but he's eligible to play somewhere else. So how bad was that situation really? That's a conversation that, of course, circulated through the fan base. There's no way that it would not, to be quite honest. And so we talk about year one to year two, and I think there's an expectation that there will be a bounce back. In fact, he has a contract extension throughout the course of everything happening that gets signed to prevent him from going and taking other big time jobs. His name, of course, came up with Arkansas, with Louisville, with all kinds of big openings across college basketball over the last year or so. But now we come into year three. They bring in a very good transfer class. They get Coleman Hawkins from Illinois, who was not going to be a cheap addition to the roster. Ugonna Yinsu, one of the best defensive centers. Akor joins the team from Samford. And you've got to think that this is a top 25 team. You've got to think that this is, if not a top 25 team, a team with some of the most upward potential in college basketball. But then it just doesn't fit together at all. Kansas State has struggled. A below 500 type of team without much offense. Doug McDaniel has not really been able to spark things on that end of the floor. The defense, while it is decent, it's not what you would think it would be with Coleman Hawkins and Ugonna and Yinsu anchoring it. You end up with Akor just leaving the program to become a professional midway through the year after he doesn't play very much at all. There's a lot of question marks around that program about what is it that is causing just so much chaos, so much um, just bad energy almost to go around there. And I think it's going to be pivotal for Jerome Tang to get this all sorted out and turned around. Like I said, he got a contract extension, so I don't think he's necessarily on the hot seat right now, but it is the perception of him and of Kansas State has shifted drastically over the past couple of years, and I think particularly this season. And finally, the last coach that we'll talk about here, Mike Young at Virginia Tech. Things just seem to be kind of slowly drifting the wrong way there. I've liked a lot of what he's done with Virginia Tech, but you look at the last few seasons, and it has slowly seemed to just go a little bit downhill, just kind of one step at a time. And now they are not competitive really at all. They are not going to compete for a spot probably in the NIT. I don't think that they really are in that mix at this point in time. Of course, you can argue the entire ACC is down, and that's true. But if you're a good program and your conference is down, that's an opportunity to jump on top of things and get better, to produce a good record and make sure that you make the NCAA tournament. Virginia Tech has not done that. They have really slid down the board as well as the others. When we come back on the other side, we will talk about the teams under the most pressure to perform here at the end of January, heading into February, right here on Three True Values. Welcome back into Three True Values as we continue this show and talk a little bit about the teams under the most pressure in college basketball right now. And I think we cannot go much further without discussing Rutgers, Steve Peichel, Rutgers, Ace Bailey, and Dylan Harper. It has not worked so far for the Scarlet Knights. Um, and a little bit confusing of a situation there where they could become the first team in college basketball history with two future top five draft selections on the same roster to miss the NCAA tournament. Now, there have been teams that have had future number one picks who missed the NCAA tournament, future top five picks who have missed the NCAA tournament. In recent history, look at Anthony Edwards at Georgia. You look at Ben Simmons at LSU. It has happened. It's possible. But to have two future top five picks in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, it has not happened. And Steve Peichel, this roster, I just do not think did a service to that group. The shooting, clearly, that they added, and that one I can forgive a little bit because it's not like they didn't go out and try to add shooters. Like they went and they tried to get some guys in the portal. They brought back a couple of guys from the roster who they thought were going to be able to shoot the basketball. They just have not done it at a successful rate to this point, and it doesn't look like they're really going to be able to turn it around in time to have any kind of success this season. But the one that I can't really forgive from this staff to miss on is the center. And the reason that I can't forgive it is not that, look, you can miss in college basketball, and there's only a certain number of entities out there. NIL, I don't know exactly what their numbers were. What did they have to work with? What was already invested into Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper? On and on and on and on. But they went out and they added shooters. So clearly they had something to work with there. And a center is about the most important thing you can have in college basketball, other than maybe star power. So how do you just completely forget to add one? Especially when you last season were kind of kept afloat and carried by Clifford Amari, who is now at Alabama. And I'm not saying you should have retained him because maybe the offers were just too high. But it means that you understand the importance of the position, at least in theory. So then to just not go out and get one in the portal when you've got so much talent incoming. I mean, you had a point guard, you had a wing scorer. What is the only other real key piece of a basketball team? That would be the center. Because I do think that on some nights, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey could have made up for a lack of shooting. Like they can just score the basketball at such a high level that if the other guys can't score, they'll just do it. But they can't go and rebound the whole time. They can't guard in the paint, particularly in the Big Ten, where centers kind of rule the day. Centers have been the most important position in the Big Ten for a while now. So, not sure how you miss on that one. So, Rutgers under a lot of pressure. That is a bad piece of history that you do not want any part of. And the biggest kind of concern, if I'm them, if you're trying to find reason for hope and you just can't find it, I think the reason is some of Ace Bailey's best performances have come in losses. And so we need to get this production to translate into wins. And to this point, it just has not been a guarantee. And then Dylan Harper, getting him going at the same time as Ace Bailey, that has been a struggle. And look, we're already towards the end of January. So I'm not saying it can't turn around. I'm saying that to this point it hasn't. And man, it'd be a shame if they can't get things going. Next we have UCLA and Mick Cronin. Look, we've talked about this one as well, like we did with John Calipari in previous episodes. So I'm not going to just dive all the way into the intricacies of this, but we know that there's kind of a disconnect there. Always has been. Mick Cronin, UCLA, the fit was always a little bit off, and he's gotten them to up the NIL resources. He has now kind of brought in this roster that balances some of the international guys with some of the transfer portal additions that he wanted. He's got some freshman talent on this roster as well. And trying to get it all the pieces put together, it looks like they're starting to get there. But if you're Mick Cronin, those rants that you went on, make no mistake, put a lot of pressure firmly on you. It puts pressure on the players, it puts pressure on your staff, and it puts pressure on the program. Because when you go out there and you talk about wanting it more than everyone else, well, that is a demerit on your assistant coaches who, if they're not going to be on your staff next year because you don't think they're giving enough effort, have to prove themselves the rest of the way to get a job elsewhere. Or, hopefully, in their case, prove it to you that they should be on the staff next year. So you've got that playing out. You've got the players who, of course, nobody wants to be the player associated with not caring. And so there's a commitment that they are required to show the rest of the year in order to establish themselves at UCLA, protect any potential pro career they want to have after this, protect their value in the transfer portal if they decide they want to leave. And then you look at the administration. Well, if the perception of this job is that it is impossible to get everyone in the program to care, that you as the head coach have to carry things, well, that does not make it a valuable job that top coaches are going to seek out. And then, of course, with Mick Cronin, it's obvious. Like, you put the pressure on yourself. You go out there and you start making accusations, talking about people, going on rants, and it better pan out. Because the two options are everyone kind of shuts down on you and things turn completely the opposite direction, or you get it figured out. So far, it looks like they might have gotten things at least rolling in the right direction towards finding a solution at UCLA. So we will continue to monitor it over the next month or so. And finally, we wrap up this segment. I think that the program under the most pressure right now is Virginia. Let me explain why. Because I think a lot of people would assume you've got an interim coach at the helm, following up a Hall of Fame coach in Tony Bennett, with a roster that doesn't really look like it's ready to compete. And you've got to wonder, what are the expectations for this year? I don't think they're very high. I don't think that they're expected to make the NCAA tournament. I don't think they're expected to really make much of a run at the ACC. Postseason basketball, probably not in their future. Some of these guys probably won't be on the roster next year. So what is it that they're under so much pressure to do? I think they are under pressure to identify the next head coach, because Virginia has a proud history and they have got a lot to uphold. I do think that Ron Sanchez has not shown to this point that he's the guy. And if there's one thing that was a positive coming out of the Tony Bennett timing, I think it's that Ron Sanchez is acting as interim head coach. Because we just discussed a successor to a Hall of Fame coach who is not really working out, has been up and down. Virginia doesn't have to face that. Because he's the interim, they have no real attachment to keeping him. They can go hand pick because they have been in this coaching search from day one of the season. They need to make sure that they have all the information because there was a team last year who was in a similar situation for completely different reasons. Totally different situation, but it put them in the same spot. And that was West Virginia. When Hall of Fame head coach Bob Huggins leaves the program, they end up with an interim head coach for the year, a team that just did not have many expectations because of that. And then they spent the entire year evaluating who they wanted to hire so that when the season ended, they were able to go get their guy. That ended up being Darian DeVries. That has panned out about as well as you could hope. West Virginia already back in the top 25 conversation in year one under their new head coach. So if you're Virginia, that's the bar. The last time that we saw a team have the entire year to evaluate who the successor for a Hall of Fame coach was going to be, West Virginia went out and they absolutely nailed it. They got the perfect fit for their job. So if you're Virginia, not only is that a rival, but it's a very comparable position. What will they do with that time, with those assets? That's going to be huge for that program and for college basketball because the ACC is down and Virginia has an opportunity to kind of surge here and put themselves back into the mix. Thanks for tuning into Three True Values. When we come back on the other side, we'll get you the games of the week and we'll get you out of here for another 7 days of this great sport as we turn our full attention on to college basketball. Welcome back into Three True Values as we wrap up the show today. We get you the games of the week as always, and then get you out of here to watch some college basketball throughout the course of the next 7 days. Tonight, Thursday, our game of the day is going to be Illinois against Maryland, two Big Ten teams squaring off. We've got two NBA draft prospects in here. Well, more than that, really, but two potential first-round draft picks in this matchup as well. Yakachonis against Queen in this one. Then on Friday, we're going Purdue against Michigan. We got a rare top 25 matchup on a Friday. We've got to tune in for that one. Then on Saturday, of course, Saturday is just so loaded, especially this time of year, but we can't skip over Auburn and Tennessee. That one is going to be huge. Auburn still without Janai Broom now, not officially ruled out for Saturday's game, but will this be the time that they finally face some pressure? They have really rolled since Janai Broom went down, not having any issues whatsoever with how deep that roster is, with how talented they are from top to bottom. Then on Sunday, we're going to go Wisconsin against Nebraska. I think Nebraska really reeling right now. They have got to lock in. They have got to stop this skid. If they don't, they're going to be firmly on the wrong side of the bubble and have a lot of work to do over the last month of the season. Then on Monday, we're going to go Iowa State and Arizona. Arizona has really turned around their season. They look like one of the best teams in college basketball in the past month or so, I would say. Iowa State, of course, has been one of the best teams in college basketball from the first tip. So that one will be one to follow for sure. Then on Tuesday, we're going to double dip with Tennessee because they're taking on Kentucky in the only ranked matchup of the night. If you don't want to go and double dip on that one, although it will be a very, very good game, I would assume, with a rivalry there, I would lean towards Louisville and Wake Forest as the next best one. Wake Forest is on the wrong side of the bubble, I think, still right now, but on a long win streak and really starting to impress. I think if they can pull off that top 25 kind of win against Louisville, it would do a lot for their resume because it's really just the computer numbers that they're struggling with right now. Their record is good. They have, like I said, strung together a very solid string of results in the ACC. So it's about getting those computer numbers up so that the committee will consider you more seriously. Then on Wednesday, as we wrap things up, we are going to go with Houston and West Virginia. We'll see Houston, who is kind of locked in as well. They're another team that kind of early on, little skid. They've come back. Their computer numbers are incredible. Everything that they have done has been really good lately, and they're facing West Virginia. We just talked about nailing their hire. They have been kind of one of the big surprises in college basketball to this point in the season and have upset quite a few teams so far, especially when they've been able to play on their home soil. So, those are the games of the week. When we come back next Thursday, we will have plenty more to talk about all across college basketball. And we're going to do it right here on Three True Values. Thanks for tuning in. I'm James Fletcher.